We need to take a quick break from our model. We need to talk about a really, really important gesture now, or set of tools that we will use quite often if we're making complicated shapes, or we need to cut into something, or cut something in half, or divide something in a way that doesn't make sense using push-pull. We're kind of taking our time away from rectilinear basic push-pull subtraction, and we're going to start looking at how to fuse things together and also cut things apart. So this is to answer your question if you've ever wondered how you do a hole or an opening in a curved wall, or how do you carve something. This is how you do it, and it's called intersect selection. So let's take a look at some of the different examples of how you would do this. And we're going to probably turn on the X-ray at some point too to make so this makes sense. All right. So let's say I have this basic rectangle. We're going to start off with something really simple. All right. Now, if I know that I want to do a circular window through this thing, I know that I can always push-pull, or let's say a dowel hole. I can always push-pull from one face to the other, and I'll get that subtraction. But let's say I want that circular opening to actually run from one corner to the other. How would I do that? The only way to do that is using intersect selected. So let's take a look at one example of that. So I'm going to start with a circle, separate group here. Make this into a group, and then push-pull it all the way through like that. Now, let's move this in place along this axis, along the green. Click to that corner, and then rotate it until it hits that opposite corner like this. And then open this up, push-pull it through like that. Okay, now let's take a look at this using our X-ray. X-ray you can turn on and off. It's just a face style. It's just it's a good way to like see through what's going and see what's happening on the inside. So what do we have here? We have two groups, this group and this group, and they are moving through each other because SketchUp, nothing in SketchUp is actually solid. You can always move things through other objects. So I want to be able to push-pull or create this opening through this rectangular shape. How do I do that? The way to do it is to select these two groups. Notice when I get nice and close, where these two groups are meeting up, where all of these little faces are meeting up, there's no actual line. There's no cut there. So if I explode them, there still isn't a cut there. So what I need to do is, once they're exploded, this is just like Follow Me, where the two things have to be exploded. Once they're exploded, you want to make sure that you've triple checked everything that you've selected. So I always go back and I do another select from left to right so that everything is within that. Then I right-click, and I'm going to get close so this is obvious. I right-click and I go down to Intersect Faces with Selection. I almost never use Model, so don't even worry about that right now, especially since we're learning this for the first time. So we're going to do Intersect Faces with Selection. And what does that do? That gives me a line where the two solids have met. So if I start to now, let me go ahead and delete this and show you what's happening on the inside. Again, you can see that there's a line where those two things have intersected. I'm going to undo that delete. I now don't want to keep this stuff anymore, so I'm going to double click that circle. Whoops, if I triple click it, I've got the whole thing. So I'm just going to double click and delete that stuff. But notice there's still this cut left behind. Now I can select that shape, or that line, excuse me, and select that line. And now what I have is I have this circle that's gone all the way through and basically push-pulled its way through. But you can't use push-pull to do this. You have to intersect the selection. If I look at it with my X-ray turned on, you can see that cut has successfully happened where the two shapes meet. Let's try this with something else. I'm just going to open this up, this ground plane a little bit bigger, make it a little bit bigger for us to use. Okay, let's say I'll go ahead and use my freehand tool to make a really weird, wonky wall shape. So I've got this really kind of crazy, push-pull this up into space. I've got this really kind of crazy shape. But when I look at this shape in elevation, I want there to be a little slant, maybe even a curved slant happening as I look at it straight on. Okay, there's no way to do that using push-pull. Let me go ahead and group this first. Shove this off to the side. Group that guy too. Okay. So let's make our secondary shape. So we know what we want it to look like in plan. What do we want it to look like in elevation? In elevation, making this into its own shape. In elevation, it needs to have this nice arc that kind of goes down like this. So I'm going to push-pull this away. So this is what it wants to look like in elevation. So what I want to do is I want to merge these two shapes. So I'm going to push-pull this all the way through. And I'm also going to push-pull it down a little bit, so it's really got the whole shape in place. Let me go ahead and hide the slab and hide this other guy, and let's take a look at this with our X-ray turned on. So we've got this shape that's now going to cut it, hopefully, as we look straight across. If I look straight on at it and I turn my perspective, that's the line I want it to cut. But I want it to cut cleanly across the top. And if you notice, when I look at this, where the two meet, it's not happening. I don't need any of this other stuff now, because all I'm doing is using this plane to cut through this thing. So I can select the two, right-click, and explode. Then I select everything again just to make sure everything's selected and everything's a part of it. And I right-click, and I do intersect faces with selection. And now where the two meet, it's given me a line. So I can select the stuff at the top that I don't want and I can delete it. Then I can select the plane that I was using to cut that shape and delete that. So now what I've got is that curve cutting along my path. Go ahead and make this into a group. I can do the same thing if I wanted to punch holes through this. I can never really draw on the face of this, because if I were to click this and make a rectangle face here and start pulling through, all it's going to do is pull through at the angle at which I started. So it's just going to pull through, and it's not going to cut there. So what I want to do is use another shape as a starting kind of dummy box. Here, let's go ahead and select. Let me just do this in a different way. I'm just going to pull this through like this. And then I'll copy a few over and shrink them down. So what I'm doing is I'm just making copies. And if I want these, maybe these want to be rotated a little bit in like that. So these are just my shapes that are going to be used to create the negative on the inside. So I'm going to be able to punch these through this shape. And again, I'll look at this with X-ray turned on. Okay, so select this entire thing, right-click and explode. Select the whole thing again, just to make sure I've got everything selected. Right-click, intersect faces with selection. Now I can kind of orbit around till I get to the top, select all that stuff I don't need. That was just there to pull those faces through. Then select those faces and delete them. So I'm just selecting and deleting. Delete. So I've got a nice punch through in that big shape. Select and group. Okay. Let's say you have, do this, expand this a little more. Let's say you have a cylinder. And you want to carve the same thing. You can do exactly the same thing. Just making a new shape. I want a square window to go all the way through this cylinder. I'm going to open this up, push-pull this up into space, and then push-pull it through. But I don't want it to be at the floor, because I want it to be at a place where I wouldn't be able to push-pull it through. Because if I had it at the floor, I could just open it up, and from the bottom, I could, easily make a line like this. You can always do this. You can always do this on a flat face from the bottom. Right? No problem. Go ahead and delete that. But again, I want to be able to punch this through this cylinder. So I'm just going to I'm going to select both objects, right click, explode, select the whole thing, right click, intersect faces with selection, and there we go. We've got that great line there. So in essence, ultimately, you can pretty much make anything in 3D using just this tool and push-pull, because push-pull will give you your solid. That brings this up into place. But now that I know that I can carve and start cutting these things apart, the options are pretty open-ended. So we'll be using this in the videos to come, going back to that interior model to start cutting apart some of that stuff that we thought at one point was not cut apartable.